Mike Tyson has reportedly sued Jake Paul for canceling their upcoming fight. It was reported earlier that the anticipated clash didn't completely fade away, despite widespread disappointment over Tyson's ulcer flare-up. Instead, fans' hopes were deferred as the bout was rescheduled for November. However, Paul, aiming to maintain peak fitness in the upcoming months, found a formidable opponent in Mike Perry, who agreed to face him on the original July 20th schedule. Perry, a former UFC fighter, has seamlessly transitioned with an impressive 5-0 record and bare knuck boxing platinum, is quite the wild card, making this a potentially perilous bout for Paul. Perry's strategy: he's aiming for a knockout against Paul to derail the Tyson fight. As he candidly shared in an interview with Michael Bisping, he said, "I'm trying to ruin that whole thing for him, see if they offer it to me after I knock Jake out, and be like, hey, do you want to fight Mike Tyson on Netflix? That's the real win here, if I can stop that. But I don't want it to hurt Mike's pockets either." Perry believes that regardless of who is involved in the bout with the 58-year-old, it is a lose situation. He said, "I don't want to be in either. And I could go in there and move around with him. And if Mike can't knock me out, which I don't know, he might be able to hurt me pretty good. And then I'll be the bad guy if I do good against the old guy." However, it's evident that Perry only wanted to use the Paul fight as a pretext to blow up his plans for the future that ought to make for a fun fight on July 20th. The current fighter vowed to exert relentless pressure on Paul, predicting that the problem child would be forced to kneel and plead for mercy in front of a packed arena. Consequently, Perry faces significant expectations. However, reflecting on a past sparring session between the two, it's hard not to question the former UFC fighter's confidence. If Paul sustains a serious injury against a formidable opponent like Perry, the Tyson event could be jeopardized, potentially costing Paul the largest payday of his career. Nonetheless, according to Paul's trainer BJ Flores, a victory over Perry might be an easy win for Jake. According to BJ Flores, Paul, Perry, and Jake sparred for 5 rounds before Paul's first fight against Tyron Woodley. At that moment, Mike was tough as nails, leaving the UFC. But Jake clearly won every round and Mike absorbed some serious hits, said. Flores is gushing about Paul's abilities. So what can he anticipate from Paul against Perry? Flores said, frankly, Flores's comments cannot be completely ignored because Mike Perry has not yet shown excellent boxing during his time in the UFC. I just don't know how he's going to be able to stand up to Jake with 10 ounces gloves and no headgear. I think if Mike Perry is aggressive, it's a very, very short night. I don't see how he stands there with Jake." Like many MMA fighters, Mike Perry didn't rely primarily on his boxing prowess. Instead, he adopted a stance that allowed him to repel takedowns and land powerful kicks. Perry's defeats against Jeff Neal and Donald Cerrone in his bouts are indicative of his tendency to stay on the periphery of the action and hardly bridge the distance with his strikes. Though Mike Perry is unfamiliar to Eddie Hearn, he is aware that the Brooklyn Nets star will face Jake Paul on July 20th, and he knows that Perry lacks precision in his punches and frequently gets hit and bleeds despite this. Flores recognizes Perry's resilience, calling him tough as hell and impressively resilient. But it is unclear if Perry can overcome Paul. Perry has always been used to dealing with doubters since, even though he had some unforgettable moments when competing in the UFC's welterweight class, he never really succeeded there and left the promotion in 2021 with a 78 record. It was unanticipated that the end of his UFC career would mark the beginning of his ascent in the combat sports world. The world of bare-knuckle boxing called, and Perry responded by making his debut in 2022. He defeated prominent Ultimate Fighter competitor Julian Lane and went on to win against Michael Venom Page of Bellator, as well as former UFC champions Luke Rockhold and Eddie Alvarez in his most recent bout. In an appearance on the MMA Hour, Perry easily defeated Thiago Alves to continue his winning streak and advance him into a boxing match with the infamous Paul. When asked about the impending fight, Hearn voiced his doubts about Perry's chances, pointing out Paul's substantial stature. Benefit Hearn stated that he had never watched Mike Perry compete and asked whether Perry weighed welterweight or about 200 pounds. He said that Perry had no chance at all against Jake. Paul, is he close to a welterweight or something? He competed at 170 pounds in the UFC, but at 185 pounds in VAR. Knuckle. This is a cruiserweight match. What's the weight at 200 pounds? If it's 200 pounds, he has zero chance. He's the face of bare knuckle, after all. Perry, who has competed in a number of weight classes in the BKFC, will go up to 200 pounds for his fight against Paul. In contrast, the problem child has a history of taking on and winning against significantly smaller opponents, like former UFC stars Nate Diaz. Ben Isrin and Tyron Woodley Hearn laughed off past predictions that didn't work out with Ariel Helwani hosting MMA Hour. Hearn told Ariel that he had predicted Francis Ngannou to defeat Anthony Joshua earlier and told him not to get too worked up over UFC fighters. Francis and G were supposed to say, "Fall in love, stop falling in love with your UFC fighters, and let me let you know." But while I don't know Mike Perry personally, I can tell that he seems like a tough guy, so I wish him the best. It's funny because I actually ran into Jake in Puerto Rico while eating dinner. The hotel I was staying at is actually where he lives. I turned around to find Jake there, and wow, that went well. We had a brief conversation, and he said, "You're welcome to the show tomorrow." That was it. The hatchet has officially been buried, but Mike Perry has big plans to play spoiler when he faces Jake Paul in the ring. Both of them have a long history together. The feud started after a sparring session while Perry, the YouTube sensation, was still a young professional. In the video, Perry is heard telling Paul, "He kicked my ass." However, Perry later claims that the session was far more balanced and that he had put Jake, his opponent, to serious challenges. Paul, who has already defeated MMA champions in his past fights, is a slight favorite against Mike Perry. Perry, on the other hand, has promised to pummel the social media sensation, saying fans on his Overdogs podcast, "Maybe I'll still be passionate after I beat on Jake. I want to TKO him or knock him out or just pummel him so bad in the corner. I'll put so much pressure on him that he just has to take a knee and he's like, Dan, what am I going to do? We'll keep putting it on him and put the hooks on him and then get on that microphone and be pissed off." It's been fascinating to watch Perry's rise from UFC journeyman to well-known combat sports figure. Following leaving the MMA company following 4 defeats in 5 fights, journey a